Now, there have been a lot of new revelations this week over Google's Wi-Fi data collection through its Street View program. A few weeks ago, the FCC released a heavily redacted report concluding that Google could not be held liable for wiretapping, slapping them with a measly $25,000 fine. Then last weekend, Google released an unredacted version of this report to the LA Times, which is where it came out that an engineer by the name of Marius Milner had in fact crafted the Street View software to collect so-called payload data. Now, payload data includes telephone numbers, URLs, passwords, emails, text messages, medical records, video and audio files sent over open Wi-Fi networks. It also turns out that Milner had told several colleagues, including a senior manager, about the capabilities, and that was way back in 2007 and 2008. So that contradicts the long-held claim by Google that the data collection had been an accident. Now, aside from asking whether this means that new investigations should be launched, why didn't the public initially get to see the full report? Here to discuss it with me is Christopher Soghoian, privacy expert at the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research. Chris, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Can you clear it up for me in terms of why exactly it is the report wasn't initially released without all these black chunks blocked out on it? You know, you wrote a piece about this saying that the FCC deserves to be grilled by Congress because they're the ones that released this report, but now they're claiming from their spokespeople that it was because Google didn't want them to put this stuff in because it was sensitive information for their business.
Right, so Google asked the FCC, please keep these details under wraps. The FCC had asked Google in the first place to provide it with the information, and Google had sort of said, we'll give you the details, but keep them to yourself. What the FCC could have done is waited till they had Google's permission to release the report and then released everything at once. Instead, they sort of released the report in two whacks. First, the heavily redacted report. You got a huge amount of press focusing on the sort of $25,000 fine and the fact that Google's engineer pled the fifth. And then much less press afterwards once the full context was revealed.
Really, but the full report was revealed by Google, right?
Google released the full report this weekend, and then the FCC posted also the full report on its website on Monday. This allows the FCC to say, well, look, we eventually posted the full report, but clearly, the goal here was to have the press focus on these sort of silly details rather than focusing on the fact that Google had been lying to us for several years.
So by now, yeah, everyone's over it. And so, but in that sense, who's really the bad guy? Is it Google or is it the FCC in terms of wanting to keep this information, I guess you could say, away from the public entirely?
I mean, Google has been lying to the public for several years, and not only to the public, but to regulators in several countries. One of the reasons why regulators in many other countries wrapped up their investigations as quickly as they did is because Google assured them, one, that it was a mistake, and two, that it hadn't used any of the data. Now, it turns out they haven't used the data, but the mistake part is seeming a little bit fishy now. So those folks are really upset, and I think the FCC needs to be sort of held to account. They are one of our privacy regulators, particularly for things that involve sort of the airwaves, the telephone companies, and anything that's being transmitted or received. The FCC is the lead enforcer on the beat, and if they are not putting the consumer's interests first, then we're sort of hosed.
So do you think that they just went easy on Google, or are there some type of legal constraints where they can't necessarily hold them criminally liable, and so they just decided that, well, that's it, there's nothing we can do about it?
I mean, I think it's important to note that the $25,000 fine is not a fine for the Wi-Fi sniffing or for the data collection. The fine is because Google stalled during the investigation and wouldn't give them documents, wouldn't provide engineers to the investigators. The FCC basically said we don't have the authority to go after Google for the actual Wi-Fi sniffing activities. I think that's problematic. If the FCC doesn't have the authority, then someone needs to be given the authority.
Well, yeah, if the FCC doesn't have that authority, then who does? Because the FCC has done an investigation, the FTC did an investigation, the Department of Justice did an investigation, and they all came to the same conclusion. So, I mean, somebody out there's got to be able to actually hold Google accountable.
Well, so I worked for the FTC for a year. Their enforcement power is very limited. It's based on deception and unfairness. And so Google didn't lie on its website about the Wi-Fi collection because it wasn't telling anyone that it was doing the Wi-Fi collection. And because Google didn't use any of the data, there's no risk of identity theft, so the FTC couldn't really do anything. I think DOJ is by far the best agency. But DOJ is also the agency that's like looking through all of our personal files with the assistance of the telcos. I don't think DOJ is really going to go and want to set a precedent saying, no, you can't look through all this information. So really, we have one agency that's supposed to be protecting us that is in fact violating our privacy, and then another one that's asleep on the job, and a third one without any authority. I mean, we're really, out of good options
here.
Well,
it sounds like we're screwed. You don't make it sound all that good. But is there at least some hope, because of course we saw a lot of outrage about this in Europe, right? You mentioned a lot of and I know that Britain now and Germany, as well as one other country out there, they've even come out and said that maybe they will reopen their investigations now that this full FCC report has come out, now that they knew that this engineer had created this software and had told other people about it at the company. So, if they do it, could there be enough public pressure, or how do you see that playing out? So
the British privacy authorities are not the best out there. They're probably, in fact, the worst in Europe. However, things have changed in the UK, particularly with regard to the Murdoch hacking scandal, in which also a company sort of covered up its crimes. There is now sort of there's a desire on the part of politicians to go after companies that lie and companies that violate people's privacy. So we may see sort of some politically motivated reopening of the investigation in the UK, whereas in Germany, the authorities really do take privacy seriously, and I think they're really pissed off that they've been lied to and are probably going to throw the book at Google.
And whereas here we have lawmakers that are trying to pass bills like CISPA that just make our privacy something that was a relic of the past, right, and shredded into a million little pieces. But let me ask you one more thing, too, because we spoke about this earlier this week, right on the heels of last weekend's big parties and celebrations here in Washington, D.C., the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Google hosted a party. Eric Schmidt was all over the place. Do you think that any of this has to do with a closer, more cozy relationship that Google now has with Washington?
And Google is now spending more money on lobbyists than Verizon. Right? Traditionally, the telco companies have been one of the bigger players in town, and Google realizes that if they're going to be in the business of violating people's privacy, if they want to be protected from the consequences of that, they're going to need to spend some money, and they've started to actually spend that money. They have a former member of Congress as their head of their DC office. They're learning to play the Washington ball game. Do I think that's right? No, but that's how business works here.
Well, yeah, they're definitely getting into the game. All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I guess we'll wait and see if maybe Congress says somebody should launch a new investigation or something, or if Google's just going to get let off the hook. Thanks.